Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at the political scene. It has been 2 months since Hamas launched its attack on Israel, and in those 2 months, Israel has retaliated with an air and ground attack in Gaza, trying to eliminate Hamas. The Biden administration's support, though, of Israel's retaliation is drawing criticism, especially from those within the progressive side of the Democratic Party. But will that criticism have implications down the road? We will discuss that and a lot more in this week's edition of Around the Table with my panel of analysts, and I'm going to introduce them to you now. Here to offer their opinions, first, the former governor of Pennsylvania, the last Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett has also served as Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania and as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Tom now teaches law at Duquesne University. Jim Byrne is the chairman emeritus of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. He served as the state chairman during a crucial time for the party. He also served as president of the Allegheny County Council and also as mayor of Millvale. Jim practices law now in the city of Pittsburgh. As we go around the table, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith's background in politics goes back to the Reagan presidency, and Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum for the state of Pennsylvania. He was also a consultant to Santorum's presidential bid in 2012. Keith has his own consulting firm. And seated across the table is someone I like to call the great philosopher of Around the Table, Joe Misty. Joe is a guiding light for a lot of Democrats across the state. He's consulted on campaigns. He's also served in several roles in city government, including that as deputy mayor. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on life and politics in the Trib. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us for this edition of Around the Table. Now, one of those progressives we've talked about who has been critical of the Biden administration and the U.S. support for Israel is Congresswoman Summer Lee, whose district includes Squirrel Hill, which, of course, is home to a lot of those of the Jewish faith in the city of Pittsburgh. Joe, a group of rabbis already has written a letter stating their frustration and their anger over Lee's position. Is this going to be a problem for her down the road in next year's election?
Well, I think it most certainly will be a problem, but not just because of the most recent controversy. There's been talk for some time now about her anti-Israel positions and the votes that she's cast. It's hard to believe that Squirrel Hill would be represented by a member of Congress who would take an anti-Israel position. But nonetheless, that's what she's done. And so the scuttlebutt is that she should look for a pretty vigorous challenge in the upcoming election. And there's a second problem that she's facing, and that is that progressives seem to be on the wane in Allegheny County. If you look at the last election, progressives took a pretty good beating for county executive, even though they squeaked that one out. But also for the district attorney's position, and they were two clear-cut progressives against two more traditional politicians, and they took a pretty good drubbing.
Summer Lee still would be the front runner, in my opinion. She is, however, going to have to expect, like the professor indicated, a contentious primary. There was already a candidate who has launched a primary challenge to Ms. Lee, and the GOP already has a candidate, I believe, to challenge whomever wins the primary. So yes, Summer will be dealing with this issue as we move into the primary season. Do I think it is enough for her to lose a primary? I'm not prepared to say that yet. I expect that it will be a vigorous primary for her for a variety of reasons. One of them being this pushback on the progressives, as we saw in Allegheny County, as the professor indicated, and the other certainly being the remarks that she has made in the past and her stance on the current issues that are happening in the Middle East. I still believe it is advantage still Summer Lee, as with most incumbents, that normally is the case, but this will be one to watch. Now, assuming Summer is to survive the primary, which I think she is likely to do, or whomever is the Democratic candidate, once the ball goes back over the net, will this remain an issue? More so if Summer is the nominee, and she's likely to be, but then it's going to pivot back to the issues that have been allowing the Democrats to be very successful since the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade. We have seen historic gains on that issue alone. And I would submit, Professor, that if Mr. Rocky had been a little bit more definitive on his stance, I will uphold the law of the land or something of that nature, that he needed about 4,000 votes. He may have lost the race on the issue of not being more definitive on his personal stance or what he intended to do. So it's going to pivot back to the Democrats on that. And if the Democrats are clear and unequivocal on their support of a woman's right to choose, as they have been, I still think that that seat next year will stay in the Democratic column.
Congressman Summer Lee clearly is in a safe Democratic seat for re-election, but that does not preclude the fact that she could have a challenger in a primary. I agree with that, and I'm thinking that this issue could be the issue. I mean, the issue is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere in this district. It's not going anywhere in the country. It's going to be hotly debated for a long time, and I believe that's the case because there is a generational divide when we're talking about these things. We all see the rallies and the protests in cities and on college campuses in support of Hamas. But we also recognize the fact that they're populated by people under 35 years old. It's unfortunate, but the reality that I see is that in the last 10, 20, actually 30 years, the school systems and the media have done a really poor job in making people understand the history of Israel and the security challenges that the Israelis face every day of their lives in that region of the world. And that's really unfortunate.
I would agree with all my colleagues, and their points are well taken. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in November of 2024 and the events that will take place. 3 months ago, nobody would have anticipated how things would change with October the 7th and the impact it's had, not just in the Mideast, but here in the United States, across the United States, and picking up what Keith was saying, college campuses and high schools and so forth. It's a very difficult time. Miss Lee has put herself in a position that she's more subject to being defeated by a Democrat than a Republican, because it's a very difficult district for a Republican to win.
So looking down the road in 2024, if the people are, if the Democratic Party is still, I'm going to call, divided over this issue, because as Keith pointed out, we've got younger people who are not necessarily in support of Israel over this, and maybe older Democrats who do support Israel. The question is, if this is still brewing nationally, will this have a greater impact? Or again, as the governor pointed out, something else may come along. So will this continue to fester or not?
Well, I would think that she's not going to be challenged in the primary by a Democrat who is not for women's health rights. That's just not good. So that issue they'll cancel each other out. And in a close race, this issue could be the decider, so to speak. And I think she has a lot of work to do in this community if she hopes to come back.
Well, I'm 100% certain that this time, next year in this race, Summer Lee is going to have to stare down this issue and address it. It's not going away. And it's a major issue. We're talking about it now. We're going to be talking about it 2 weeks out from the election. And she'll have either dealt with it and put it aside and managed it, or she won't. But she has to deal with it. And quite frankly, I'm saying next October. No, she's going to have to do it May, because the real challenge is from the left. And we'll see if that happens in May. But I think she understands this already, and I have a feeling her handlers are going to handle this situation.
Okay, we need to take a break, and we just a nice segue into our next segment, also talking about issues. We'll be back in just a moment.